Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. It's going to be so much fun. I cannot wait to get started today. It's going to be another great day of amazing stories and all kinds of fun stuff. I have always what I try to do on my corner is bring on someone who has been a huge influence and made a huge impact in my life and as an artist. And I it we I, my corner would not be complete without this man. It is no understatement. You know him, of course, from Broadway and Broadway touring companies of Sweeney Todd, Cats, the LA Sit Down of Phantom of the Opera, from film and TV, a million things, but including Pretty Woman, Cheers, The X-Files, and of course, our common love, Shrek. But he did the movie and got paid a lot more than I did. And then, yeah, I mean, honestly, there's nothing much more I can say about this incredible talent that we have here. So I'm going to bring on Mr. Calvin Remsburg. Woo!
Hey.
Hi. Oh, thanks so much for coming on today. It's going to be so much fun.
My pleasure.
So Calvin, in addition to all those performing things, is also is one of LA's premier vocal teachers, and was my vocal teacher as well as my brother's and my wife's for a period of time, and then also one of LA's premier directors. He's just incredible. Calvin and I actually met doing I think it was the first Los Angeles production of Parade, right?
That is correct. Yes.
It was the first one. Yeah, and it was a life-changing moment for me. I remember going up. It was so funny. I just wanted to sing High Seas and like sing and tell this story and like sing this score. It was something I'd obsessed about for a long time, and I was one of the few non-members of this company that got to participate in the show. And I remember during this brief rehearsal period, I was like, there's this part in the courtroom that I would really love, and I kept bugging him about it and bugging him about it and bugging him about it until he finally was like, fine, you can sing it. So me and Jason Livesey got to sing all these crazy high tenor things, and it was just a thrill and to be a part of that epic show, which then later changed my life again later down the road. But that's how Calvin and I met. And then I also got the pleasure of being directed in the production of Titanic, which is another show I just got to sing my face off and tell some good stories. Calvin is just incredible. Those were both staged readings, but full out. I mean, like we were holding books, but we were doing the show. I mean, like we were doing the show minus a set, and it was just a wild ride because you rehearse for 5 minutes and then you go up and you're basically off book. And but Calvin is and I want to talk about this later. You know, he's worked with truly the masters. I mean, from Hal Prince to Trevor Nunn, and I want to talk to you about how those people influenced you as a director, because you work very fast, but you're so great with. You remind me a lot of Hal Prince. You're so great with storytelling, but of course with pictures, you know what I mean? Like you can like put together a gorgeous looking show, which is, you know, something that obviously Hal Prince was a genius at. So anyway, so speaking of legends, I mean, you've worked with Hal Prince, Stephen Sondheim, Trevor Nunn, Angela Lansbury, George Hearn, the list goes on and on and on. I know it's gonna be a theme throughout our conversation today. But I want to start actually with some of your film and TV stuff. I mean, you've been in some iconic things, from Pretty Woman to The X-Files to Cheers, and of course doing a voice in Shrek, which is amazing that, you know, that you got to be a part of that. So tell me, is there anything, I mean, about that time in your life that would be fun to share, and fun stories about any of those sets, or what that was like for you, kind of going back and forth between film and TV and stage?
Well, let's start with Shrek, since we have that in common.
Yeah.
Few people remember this, but when DreamWorks Animation founded itself, all of the musical theater singers in town were invited in by DreamWorks to come in and have 5 minutes to lay down 2 songs for their animation library.
Wow.
In other words, so they would have a record of who was around in case they needed them. So I went in, the head of the music department for DreamWorks was a woman named Mary Lotta Jacobs. And I went in and I did my 2 songs and we chatted for a little bit. And then I went on about my life. And several years later, the phone rang and it was Mary Lotta. And she said, we are putting together this new animated film and we have need of someone like you to do some workshops of the music that we're going to be doing in there. Because there's a song that has to be sung live. And would you be able to come in? She said, this is not going to pay a lot of money. I can pay you like $100 for this session. And I said, well, of course I would do that. So I went over to Tom Greek's studio. Have you ever been over there, TJ?
I have not. No, I've been to DreamWorks Animation and done the whole tour, but I've never been over to his studio, no.
Well, Tom is a wonderful musical director and pianist, and he has a state-of-the-art studio out back of his house.
Amazing.
So I went over there with John Bison, dear departed John Bison, and the 2 of us met with, and we discovered that the music for the little thing we were doing had been written by another mutual friend of mine named Kirby Tepper.
Uh-huh.
So we went in and we did spent a couple hours laying down this track of this little tune, which was, for all of you who have seen the movie, it's the Merry Men sequence in Shrek. So we did it, laid it down, everything was fine. About 2 weeks later, they called and said, can you come back in for another session? We've made some tweaks. And I said, sure. So I came back in, did the tweaks, left. Got a call about 2 weeks later, can you come back in for a 3rd section? We've made another change. And this time I went in and the whole triumvirate of DreamWorks was in there, including Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Oh man, no pressure.
No pressure. But we played around and we triple tracked and quadruple tracked, and I sang high notes and low notes and everything you can say. And at the end of that session, Andrew Adamson, who was the director of the movie of Shrek, came up to me and said, well, we're going to ask you to do the movie. Woo! And is there anything we need to know? And I said, well, you'll have to call my agent and work it out. I said, but here's the deal. I don't want to be hired on a musician's contract. I want a voiced by contract, because I knew that only then do you go into the higher residual category.
Yep.
And he said, I think that won't be a problem. So it wasn't, and that's what we did. Then we went into the recording sessions for Shrek. We did 4 of them. For that little bit of time I was on there, we did 4 sessions, each at $2,500 a session.
Woo!
So for the whole 4 sessions, I made 10 grand. Now, the last couple of sessions, they made a big change where they decided we were all going to have French accents. That was new. So we did that. And then the very last session, they had forgotten to get one little short snippet with the French accent. So we had to go back in, but they had to pay us again. So then the movie comes out. It's this enormous hit. And I got a call from Mary Lotta about 6 months later. They wanted us to come back in and do a special recording of YMCA for the DVD.
Right.
So we went back in. 6 months later, a little check comes in the mail, and I see it's from DreamWorks, from SAG, but it's from DreamWorks Studio. And I opened it up. My first residual check. You will not guess how much it was.
Oh my gosh, I feel rude asking, but can you tell me?
I will. Just take a guess though first.
Oh gosh, well, I mean, having had some friends book like national commercials and stuff, those residuals can be huge. So I'm gonna just guess like 20, 15 grand.
$67,000.
What? Oh my Lord! And
a week later, the DVD check came for $35,000. So I made $100,000 off of Shrek, and that of course goes on and on. Now it doesn't go on and on at that kind of money.
No, it goes smaller and smaller, yeah. But still.
Yeah, but can you believe it? And I had the good fortune to call John Bison up and say, "Have you looked at your mail today? Go get that check." And I heard him screaming all up and down the house.
Oh my God, dear Johnny Bison. That is insane. And like, unbelievable. It was one of the parts that I was so bummed that they cut out of Shrek the Musical. It is such a funny part of that film. And
I agree.
I love it. So anything about Cheers or Pretty Woman or The X-Files? The X-Files was so disturbing. Like, knowing you, I was like, it was so disturbing and amazing because I love that show.
I did too. And, you know, I had told my agent while I was in LA doing Phantom of the Opera, I said, I will do anything on X-Files. It's my favorite show. Can you get me on? And he kept trying, and nothing ever happened. And then one day the phone rang and I picked it up and the voice said, Calvin, this is Rick Milligan. I'm the casting director for the X-Files. And we have this part and we just want to offer it to you. Woo! I didn't even have to audition for it. So I said, absolutely. So I went in and shot it on the 20th Century Fox back lot.
Right.
The first scene was shot at that port in Long Beach, you know, the seaport.
Yeah.
We shot that there, and they had decked it out to look like it was in India.
Right.
And then the rest of it was shot on the Fox lot with all the special effects. And the thing that I remember the most about it was the way the special effects crew, I had this big scene where I had to bleed everywhere, you know, out my pants, leg, and everything. And they would hook me up with all these tubes, and I had 3 suits, all of which were, you know, copies of one another, so I could do the multiple takes.
Yeah, right.
But the effects crew was so wonderful. When right before the take, they would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, good luck," and everybody would say, you know, say thank you, and so that they were all in it together, and Amazing. It was remarkable. I really loved it.
What a great set to be on, and you're part of so much. Throughout your whole career, you've gotten to be a part of so much history, and again, working with so many incredible people. So I want to talk a bit about before we get into Cats, Phantom of the Opera, and then ultimately Sweeney Todd, because we're going to end with that. If everyone's wondering when we're going to talk about Sweeney Todd, so with talking about directing and performing, at what point did you realize you wanted to direct? What was that journey like, going from one to the other? Like your first directing gig. I'm assuming I know it's a lot. People that are attached to a show, like Dana Solomondo with Cats and you with Sweeney Todd and certain things like that. I know that that helps a lot when you are making that transition. And of course, some people get stuck with only being able to do those shows, but then, you know, some people then end up getting to do those shows plus, which is what you were able to do. So yeah, talk a little bit about that journey, and if you you did both hand in hand for so long, like was there a something for you that was difficult about that, or do you miss now performing at all that good stuff?
Well, you know, you have it a little teeny bit backwards, because I set out to be a director.
Oh, for real? How did I not know that about you? Shut up.
I went to college at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I was not a theater major. I was an English literature major, but my minor was in theater direction. And I took directing class and studied all that. Now, I was in a few shows at William and Mary as well, but I was really planning, I really wanted to direct. So when I got out of school, I started nosing around to get some opportunities to direct. And I discovered that, at least in the professional world, I would have had to have started out as a stage manager or as an assistant to someone else before anybody would give me the reins of my own show.
Right.
But the other way in was to become known as an actor and then to move to directing.
Yeah.
So I decided to be an actor and did that for close to 15, 20 years. And then once I started directing, I basically retired from performing.
Yeah, you only came every once in a while.
Every once in a blue moon, but I started directing. And I think that my very first show in LA might have been that parade.
No, really?
It was either that or it was the Sound of Music.
No, because you had done Sweeney Todd at Performance Riverside prior to that.
Okay, well then it might have been that Sound of Music that I did out in Thousand Oaks.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Could have been that. I'm not sure I can really remember what the very first one was, but once I started to make my way into that world, I decided, well, I think I'm going to retire from performing and just put my concentration on directing. And that's pretty much what I did. And then there were a couple of shows that I really wanted to do that nobody seemed to be doing. So I ended up producing them either by myself or with friends of mine,
Sure.
as I did for the LA premiere of Glory Days.
Right.
We produced that ourselves, and I directed it. And I also directed the LA premiere of The Last 5 Years.
Yes, you did. Yep.
So it's a circuitous route, but to tell you the truth, TJ, I loved performing, but I did not miss it once I left, because directing, and you will know this, it's like being able to perform all the roles.
Exactly. Yep.
You get as much joy and as much personal feedback when you're seeing your own work up there, yep, as you do in doing it yourself.
100%.
So I didn't feel like I missed anything by giving up performing. And now I am basically retired here in LA. I mean, here in Palm Springs, where I live.
Which, by the way, what did you call that the other day that made me die laughing?
Oh, God's waiting room.
It's the best. Oh, that's so funny.
That's the truth. That's the truth. But I had always planned to retire at a certain age, and when I got there, I just did it. I sold my house, and I already had this house here. I've had this house for 20 years or so.
Right.
But I just decided that I wanted to be able to enjoy the last part of my life by not being fettered and tied to any kind of work.
Yeah, and it's amazing because now, like, if and when you decide to do something, it's because you want to, not because you have to, or whatever, which is so wonderful. And that's the goal. So, kind of talking about two legends, Trevor. Since we're talking about directing, Trevor Nunn and Hal Prince, are two of Broadway's greats. They've brought us so many incredible shows. So can you tell, did they influence you at all as a director? Did you learn the good, the bad, and the ugly from having worked with them on the shows you worked with them on? And then do you have any anecdotes or fun stories about either of them, especially Hal, since we recently lost him?
I do have some great stories. I had always idolized Hal Prince because of his connection with Sondheim. I just thought that the Sondheim Prince shows you could not beat with a stick. I mean, they're the ultimate theater, and having seen them all in their original Broadway productions, I was just flabbergasted. And when I got the chance to work with him, I knew that I was working with my childhood hero.
Right.
He could not be more different than Trevor Nunn.
Yeah.
Hal is beautiful at creating at conceiving a project,
right,
and then creating marvelous staging for it,
right,
and beautiful pictures. But as far as the acting of it is concerned, he's not one to give you an awful lot of detailed instruction.
I have a great story that I want to tell when you're done. That's totally by way of Norman Large about exactly that. So keep going.
I mean, he would look at me once and said, "This is more Sidney Greenstreet." And I went, "Okay." And I had no idea who Sidney Greenstreet was at that point. But I went home and I found out, and I thought I knew what he wanted, so I gave him that. But Trevor Nunn, on the other hand, really wasn't that concerned with the staging. Few people would know it, but even though he's credited as the director of Cats, Gillian Lynn directed it.
100%.
It's like 90% choreography, and she staged it all.
Right.
But Trevor was actually wonderful about taking these poems of T.S. Eliot and overlaying this intricate little story and telling you all about what your place was in the hierarchy and establishing the feeling of the tribe. And
right.
I'll tell you, when I go see Cats productions now from directors and from people that don't know that background, I don't get it.
Yeah.
As much as I did, having come through the ranks with Trevor and Gillian both, about what that all meant.
For sure.
And Trevor couldn't have been much more personable. Trevor walked into a room and it was just Trevor, whereas Andrew Lloyd Webber walks into a room with 15 people.
Right.
So you don't ever feel the personal connection with Andrew that you do with Trevor and with Hal comes with Ruth Mitchell, but
Sure.
that's about it.
Sure.
And so you don't feel like you can't talk to them.
Amazing.
I will tell you one quick little story about Phantom of the Opera.
Please.
I was doing an off-Broadway production of Sweeney Todd in New York called The Teeny Todd that was later done at Circle in the Square. I was in the original version of that at the York Theater. And I was doing that at night and rehearsing Phantom during the day. And the first 4 or 5 days of rehearsal, Hal is yelling at me up one side and down the other, really picking on me. And I am going, I'm going to be fired from this. I can't seem to be doing anything right. And even the rest of the cast, Norman, Barbara Lang, they were all coming up and say, boy, he's sure picking on you. And I'm going, yeah, I don't know what's wrong. And then one day he said, quit being the Beetle in Sweeney Todd. And then it dawned on me that I was doing this other production and he was mad at me for doing that. And he never said it, but I just said, well, I'm just trying to give you what I saw on Broadway, Hal. And he said, well, that's the problem. Do your own thing, bring your own thing. And so I did overnight a 180-degree reversal of what I had been doing, came up with my own thing, and he looked at me and smiled, and we were all good after that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Norman Large was doing The Woman in White with him. And he said an actor, it was like during tech or something, and this has some language in it, so if you're offended, cover your ears. He said, the actor, the director, or Hal was just like, I need you to X, Y, and Z, like cross left. And the actor was like, I'm a little confused. Can you help me with that because of X, Y, and Z? Had like kind of said like, was very confused, because if you really, as a director, when you dissect a lot of Hal's shows, they are visually stunning, but they don't always make sense, like acting motivation wise. Like some of the staging, you're like, why are they doing that? But there was silence, and then over the God mic, Hal Prince was like, because I told you to. And he was like, great, all right, noted, no problem. And he never asked for help again. But he also, I had the honor of getting to meet him. So I have a personal Hal Prince story that was very impactful for me. We were in a small room. It was at the NAMPS conference. He was the keynote speaker, and we were, all these producers from all over the country were all in this room, Broadway and regional. And I was sitting in the first row, like right in front of him, and he was talking about, in my day, it was all about being a creative producer, and about how now there's 50 people above a title versus like in my day there was, one creative producer above the title that wrangled all of the artistic team when that needed to happen, when someone needed to kind of go, this is what we're doing, if the director, the choreographer, whoever were disagreeing. And you saw this sense of continuity and a different time. It was a very different time on Broadway, this iconic time that you were a part of. And he kept referencing to me. He goes, we need more young producers like this guy. And he just kept talking to me. And I was just like, just looking up, like going, oh my gosh, Hal Prince is talking about me. He doesn't even know who I am, but he's talking like about me. And so afterwards he asked to chat with me. And so we had this great conversation, and he was so generous and kind, and obviously very different than he would be in the room directing, but he was such a talent, man, and such a personality. He was really, really cool.
Well, that was back in the day of the gentleman producer, as we used to say. Like David Merrick, and Hal Prince produced a lot of his own shows, and Stuart Ostro, and many of the other gentleman producers, Richard Barr and Chuck Woodward, who I both knew, who did all of Edward Albee's plays. And nowadays you can't put on a show unless you have like 25 people to raise the money. So
exactly,
it priced itself out of existence. But yeah, that's true. You're very right. There was that time period in there when it was just the gentleman producer.
Yeah, exactly. And those days have mostly gone. It's either a corporation or like Universal, or it's many people, all of them putting in $1 million. And you're like, wow, like $1 million only buys you 1/25 of the show. And you're like, that's insane. But anyway, so let's go to Cats. So Cats is a show that is so funny. It's like, I mean, such a huge mega hit, which I always found confusing because I myself, it was funny. I have an equal love-hate relationship with that show. It was either Peter Pan with Kathy Rigby at the Pantages or Cats at the Schubert. That was my first show, and it was very close together. I couldn't remember which, but I went up. It was so impactful to me as a kid, because as a kid, I didn't care about what it was about. I was just like, wow, it was like visually amazing, and the music was great, and you got to go up on stage at intermission, which, by the way, I wandered away from the line and no one noticed. I did this a lot as a kid. It's such a different time, like helicopter parents versus like parents back in the 80s who were like, be home before dark, and I was like a little kid. But anyway, I wandered off into the wings. I remember specifically I went to my left, so I was stage right, and I wandered off, and this must have been like the area that everyone, because it was all these cats literally like lounging around, laying on top of each other, having this conversation. I remember like, I want to meet the white cat. That's what I wanted. I was like, I want to meet the white cat. And this actor, I don't remember who it was, obviously, as a kid, was like, oh, I think you're lost, buddy. And like I got to meet the white cat, and then he ushered me back to the line, of course, where my parents had no idea that I had even gone on this adventure. But then walk around, see Deuteronomy, go back to my seat. And then it was still after the show, I was asking my parents to hunt down the white cat. I wanted to like meet her again. I don't know why. But anyway, it has struck a chord with a lot of people. It obviously had a hugely successful run. But when you're putting together a show like that, like I did the people version, Working, which is like, same type of thing, but with people. And how did Trevor like get y'all on this journey, and like what was just putting that together? Like, did you get to see the show beforehand or during your run? Like, tell me a little bit about those things.
Well, we weren't required to see the show. I think probably all of us had, but we weren't required to. The whole first 5 days of rehearsal, we did not touch the material.
Wow.
We did improvs and getting to know one another. And looking back on it, he structured it so that the hierarchy of the show, with Deuteronomy as more or less the king, and the Rum Tum Tugger as the sort of rebel, Mr. Mistopheles as the prince. All of these relationships were sort of choreographed subtly into these games. And so by the time that week ended, we had, as a company, had arranged ourselves in the proper dynamic to then start doing the show. It was a really astounding experience to not, when you're on these Broadway shows, time is money. And for us not to, we did have music rehearsals, but we didn't stage anything.
Wow.
Until after that first 5 days. So that was really rather remarkable,
Yeah, when you have that kind of time, that's amazing, because it is, you go into the material already having relationships with people, which is, what really gives the authenticity to a show. What was that intermission meditation like? Oh my gosh, I could imagine that just being hell.
Well,
but what was it like?
As you remember from when you saw it, the audience is allowed up on stage to look around at the oversized set of the junkyard.
Right.
And old Deuteronomy is left on stage sitting there. And the cast can come up and talk to you. And they did. And nobody, not Trevor, not Jillian, no one gave me anything, direction as to how to handle it.
Ugh.
So, I would want to come up and say, how long does it take to put your makeup on? And you're going, well, do I want to answer this as the actor, or do I want to answer this as the character? So I decided, well, I'm the character, so I should so I would say, what makeup?
Right.
And then they would go, that's silly, but really, how long does it take? And then you realize, oh, I can't really do it that way either. So I sort of split the difference. I played the character. I played myself as an actor, but with the kindness and the warmth and the
ambiance of the character.
Of the character. And that was the way I chose to do it. And even when they would ask you to sign autograph things, I was signing Old Deuteronomy at the beginning, and the stage manager came out and went, well, Ken Page didn't sign Old Deuteronomy. He signed Ken Page. I said, all right. And I started signing my real name. So I found my way into that, but I was given no help.
What a unique, idea and experience. And that was something I always looked forward to doing when I saw the show. Anytime I've seen the show, even as an adult, it's still cool, What was your favorite? Okay, so you did tell in the last panel you told the cat.
Well, wait a second. Let me tell you a little story about that. What we're talking about, the intermission. While we were in Philadelphia, I got a note from a guy who said, I'm bringing my girlfriend to see the show, and I'm going to propose marriage to her. Can I enlist your help in doing that?
I love those.
So I went to the stage managers and I said, well, this is what's going to happen. Can I let him get me the ring and I'll pull it out, hand it to him and say, so what we did was I stood up and calmed all the crowd around me and I said, ladies and gentlemen, on the evening of the Jellicle Ball, many wonderful things happened. And so tonight, and I pulled the ring out, this young man has something to say to this young woman. And then he proposed marriage to her, and I was right there sort of officiating it. It was really fun. And that kind of thing, that happened 2 or 3 times, things like that throughout the tour. So
I love it. What was, can you give us a Andrew Lloyd Webber anecdote before we move on to Phantom? As our transition.
Well, auditioning for Andrew is an interesting experience because when you audition for Sondheim, Sondheim will talk to you, but Andrew doesn't. He sits in the back and he doesn't, you would think it'd be the other way around.
Right.
It's not the other way around. So Andrew, I did all of my auditions. I could see him out there and I got the part, of course, but I met him only when he came to Chicago, and we were sort of forced into a room together. And then I introduced myself, and he shook my hand and said, well, of course, I've seen your work a million times. But he was not at all personable.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be. So I was wondering, like, if there was a different behind the scenes, you're working with him kind of guy. But
no. He has always got an entourage around him, and he sort of retreats into that entourage so he doesn't have to deal with you personally,
So my friend Nancy has a very unique Andrew story, which she told when we were doing my corner a few weeks ago. She was one of the first people to ever sing Memory from Cats because she auditioned for the original company, and it was down between her and Elaine Page and one other woman, and Andrew Lloyd Webber played her audition. Like,
oh God.
So I was like, wow, he doesn't do that anymore. No. But I was like, that's something like, you would definitely hold that near and dear for quite some time. But so now let's go to Phantom. This was now like the 3rd largest professional show I had ever seen. I saw it twice in LA in 4th grade and 5th grade, and sat right under the chandelier both times. I was so lucky and excited, and my brother, it scared the out of my brother. I mean, my brother saw it and was like, oh my gosh, scared the living crap out of him. But I knew I was hooked. When I saw that, I was just like all in, right? So what was it like being a part of that show? How long were you with it? How did you prepare for such a long run, stamina-wise? I mean, just all of it. Yeah, and then what was your favorite part of doing the show and your least favorite part of doing the show?
All right. Well, that's a lot. The thing that I remember the most was the first time I saw Phantom. My dear friend, June Havoc, and for those of you who don't know June Havoc is, if you've ever seen the musical Gypsy, which is about Gypsy Rose Lee, June was Gypsy's sister. in real life. And we met on the bus and truck tour of Sweeney Todd. She played Mrs. Lovett and became inseparable friends for the rest of her life. And I adored her, but she called me up and said, I've gotten invited to the dress rehearsal of Phantom on Broadway, and you're going to be my date. So I came with her, and I saw it, and I was dazzled. It was spectacular.
Yep.
But I also have to say that as I looked at it, I could not imagine why I wasn't in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I said, this is tailor-made for me.
Right.
But I never got an audition for it. I guess I was out with cats and just never heard about one or whatever. So anyway, when they started talking about auditions for the first national, which wasn't really a first national, was the LA company, I kept trying to get in, and I could not get an audition for it, TJ. Could not get an audition.
Wow.
So I was down at the Michael Bennett Studios rehearsing, and they were having a cleanup rehearsal for the Broadway production, and Jillian was there. And she came out, and we hugged and kissed, and she said, how come you're not in this? And I said, I can't get an audition. And she went, well, that's ridiculous. But still couldn't get one.
Wow. Even with the choreography, I was waiting for you to be like, and then I got my audition.
Nope. But what happened was Frank Mastrone threw a New Year's Eve party, and he was in the Broadway production. And I said, Calvin, if you go to this New Year's Eve party, you're going to walk out of there with an audition. And I walked into the party, and David Caddick, the musical director, and Mitch Lemsky, who was Hal's assistant director on the piece, cornered me in a corner within 5 minutes of my being at that party. What are you doing? Can you still sing this? Can you just still do that? And I had my audition.
Wow.
So I went in for my audition, but I thought I was auditioning for Piangi, the tenor.
Right.
And at the end of my audition, I could just tell I wasn't going to get it. And I went across the street to a bar and started to drink myself under the table. Anyway, on Friday of that week, they were having the final callbacks for the LA company, and I had not heard anything. And I was working temp at a law firm. My phone rang at 11 o'clock, and my agent called and said, they just called over from the Majestic Theater and said that you've been auditioning for the wrong part, and they want to see you over there right now. And I said, all right, just give me 15 minutes, and I'll tell them I'll be there. So I went in, and I went on an early lunch. I took a cab over to the Majestic, walked backstage. Treat Williams, the actor, was waiting to go on to audition for the Phantom.
Oh my God.
And they stopped him in the wings and said, excuse me, and they took me out. And Cameron McIntosh said to me, you think you've been auditioning for the wrong part. Do you know Prima Donna? And I said, well, yes, I do, sort of. And he said, well, go downstairs with our assistant musical director, Kristen Blodgett, who had been my conductor on Cats.
Oh my gosh.
And run through it and then come back up. So I did. I came back up. I sang it. And at the end of my singing about the opening chorus, they stopped me. And Hal looked over and said, well, whose idea was that? And Cameron said, well, I thought this was how we should go. And Hal said, would you like to go to California? And I said, I'd love to go to California. He said, see it rehearsal. And that was the end. I got it right then and there.
Wow. Oh my. From like, couldn't get in to like, boom, you're booked. Like.
And I found out later from Norman that part of the reason was they had hired Norman to be the other manager with me, and they were going to let him cover the Phantom, so they really needed him.
Yeah.
And the other guy that they had been seriously considering for my role was so much older. It was, I guess I can say this, it was William Chapman, a very, very well-known.
Yeah.
And they decided that they put Norman and him together, and it looked kind of like father and son, and they didn't think that would work. So Cameron is the one who thought of me.
Wow.
And that's how it happened. And I went back in and auditioned and got the part.
I mean, it was just it was perfect. And they didn't often do it that way, but the way that yours and Norman's characters were done physically, just all of it. You know what I mean? It was just such a perfect relationship.
And everybody told us, you know,
they typically have like the tall one and the shorter one, but that was it. You know,
that was it. And they really, they told us later that we were the best combination they'd ever had.
I
that
totally agree.
I got laughs on lines no one else did, and and Norman and I became inseparably best friends during that time. We never had a crossword in the entire 4 years of doing that show, and that's pretty unusual when you consider all of our scenes were together.
100%. I mean, you both are incredible people. I love Norman.
And I do.
Yeah. So, okay. So now, do you have any fun blooper or funny stories about that before we move into Sweeney Todd? Because we have to
Yep.
blow into Sweeney Todd here.
Yep. I have just two little quick things. We had an earthquake in the show, in the second act manager scene.
Okay.
And we kept
terrifying.
We kept going, but the reason we knew that there was one is you could hear the lighting fixtures clinkling and jiggling and all of that, and the audience started murmuring. We couldn't feel the earthquake ourselves, but we saw. So we went ahead and finished it. Got applause on the end of the scene for the fact that we kept going. 2 years later, we had another earthquake at exactly the same point in the show.
What?
Exactly the same point.
You're moving. You were just that moving. It was just
that's what it was. But that was really fun. And the other real blooper was one night we came out and the lighting equipment started to malfunction, and the lighting board started going through all of the light cues, one right after the other, with no timing in between, and it looked like a disco. So we're going around singing the whole first manager scene, looking up, and the lights are flashing and going all over. And then all of a sudden, everything went pitch black. And then the work lights came on, and 3 follow spots came on. And we did the rest of Phantom of the Opera, mind you, in 3 follow spots and work lights.
No.
And I felt so sorry for the audience because, you're paying all this money for this spectacle. And half of the spectacle is the lighting, And
literally the lighting in that show is unbelievable. Plus it magically hides a lot of stuff that you're not supposed to see. So that would not be fun. That would not be fun. So let's get into Sweeney Todd. Your first big Broadway extravaganza. Let's start at the audition. I know you have a great audition story about that.
I do. It starts when I went to New York in the spring of the year that it was running on Broadway to see my college friend Glenn Close, whom I went to college with and had directed.
We're birthday twins. You're okay. We got to talk about. I did not know she was like a good friend because now we're gonna have a different conversation later offline. Okay, great.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I went to see her make her Broadway musical debut in Barnum. I had seen her in Crucible of Blood and a few other things, but I went to see her do Barnum. And after one evening out, she said, "Meet me at Joe Allen's after the show." And Len Cariou, who she was dating at the time, and they were living together, came over and joined us at Joe Allen's. And we sat there and ate and drank. They closed the bar, and we're still in there till like 4 a.m. I found out later Len was a part owner.
Okay.
That's why they let us do it. But anyway, during the course of that evening, he looked at me and went, "Boy, you should be playing the Beatle in this thing. Have you ever auditioned? Do you sing?" And of course, Glennie did a double take. And so they fixed up my audition through Joanna Merlin, who was Hal's casting director. And I went up and auditioned for it. I flew up from Washington, D.C., where I was currently working as a school teacher.
Oh my gosh.
At the famous Madeira School for Girls, where my headmistress at the time was Jean Harris, who was later arrested as the Scarsdale diet murderess.
Oh my God.
I know, it's just amazing. So I flew up to New York, did the audition, and they said, "Well, we'll have you back in a month to sing for Hal and Steve." So they called me back a month later, and they said, "Well, your audition will be at such and so a time." And I said, "Oh my God." I was in charge of Madeira's graduation, and it was on the day of our last dress rehearsal for that. And they said, "Well, if you can't," because I said, "I can't come that day." And they said, "Well, if you can't come that day, we're not going to be able to consider you." So I said, "I'll be there." So I just went to school, set everything up for the rehearsal, got my assistant aside and said, "You're going to have to run this." And I told her what was going on, and I got conveniently sick. And then I went to the airport, caught those days they had hourly planes from
Yep.
airport to New York. I caught one up, took a cab into the Gershwin Theater, the Urist at that time, and then I went up and auditioned for the show, and I sang a piece that had been written for me by Roger Ames, a dear friend of mine, that was very like the Beatles' music, very high notes and the whole thing.
Right.
And I went in and sang it, and Hal looked at me and he said, well, that'll be all for the moment. And by the time I got home to Washington, the message was on my answering machine that I had the part.
Unreal. How magical. So you were, how long had the show been running by the time you leapt into it?
It ran in New York for a year, maybe just a little over a year, and then it closed, and most of the Broadway cast then went into the national tour with Angela, but not with Len. They at the very end of the New York run, it was George Hearn and Dorothy Loudon playing the two roles. So
yep.
they decided to put George, because Len was being persnickety about how he negotiated the deal. He didn't want to do the tour, but wanted to do LA. And Angela said, no, I want it to be the same person all the way through. And so they put George and Angie together, and that was magical chemistry. And so I guess when I auditioned for it, it'd probably been running close to 9 months or 10 months.
Okay, so...
So they were getting ready for the national tour, and they knew it was going to close, and they knew. So there were only 5 of us, I believe, that were new to it. The rest of it was the entire New York cast.
Wow. And so is what they filmed the national tour?
Yes.
Okay. That makes sense. I was wondering how it wasn't the original Broadway company. Got it.
It was filmed at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion.
Oh, okay. I don't know why I didn't know that either. Okay.
Yep.
That's so cool. What was that rehearsal process like? And just, I want to, of course, get a George and Angela, a Sondheim story. And then if you have any bloopers, because then we're going to be out at the end of our session. I'm so sad. We have to go to the next class.
It goes so fast, doesn't it?
It does.
The rehearsal period was, well, it was my first big New York rehearsal thing. So I was, of course, a nervous wreck during the first 5 days, because I knew that they could fire you in the first 5 days without any reason. So once I got to that 6th day of rehearsal, I breathed a sigh of relief. But there wasn't anything really wrong with it. Nobody was giving me a hard time or anything. But I do remember that at the read-through, when we came out to sit down at the very first day and everybody sat down, Angela patted the seat next to her and said, come sit by me, to me. So I sat next to her. And I thought I was nervous. She was a nervous wreck during that read-through, because she hadn't been doing it, I guess, for 6 to 9 months. And she was just nervous. I don't know why it was, but she was.
Wow.
But also sitting in front of us was Hal Prince, Stephen Sondheim, Paul Gemignani, the designers. I mean, it would look like Mount Rushmore.
Right.
And it was an incredible.
That's like the perfect way to put it, like Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, it really did. And of course, then, you get a different perspective than when you start working with everybody. But I remember that the last rehearsal we rehearsed at the Palace Theater. There was no show in there, so we rehearsed on stage at the Palace Theater in New York. And the last rehearsal we had in New York before we left for our first city, which was Boston, they turned into a gypsy run-through. And all of the Broadway casts in New York filled the Palace Theater to overflowing. And we did our last rehearsal there. And that's when I really felt like I was a part of it, because they stood and screamed for everything. It was really, and Glenn Close came to see me in that. Because she had been instrumental in getting me into the show in the first place.
Wow. I mean, like, so many things. So what, before we wrap, like, 2 other questions, unless you have any other, like,
well, you had mentioned about a blooper.
Yeah, blooper, exactly.
The biggest blooper that I can tell you is kind of a tragic story, and you know what I'm going to talk about.
Oh, yeah, you got to tell the story.
On the 13th performance, Angelina Rayo, who was
of course on the 13th performance, by the way.
Absolutely. And she was a good friend of mine because she was also from Washington, D.C. So we knew each other before, and we're in the show together. She went down the chute at the end when Sweeney Todd slits her throat. And she had newly rubbered her shoes because she was slipping a little bit. So they put new rubber on the bottom of her shoes. But the bottom of the chute was covered with foam rubber. So when her shoe rubber hit the foam rubber, her 2 feet went, and they both broke.
This is the word.
We didn't really, I couldn't tell. I knew something had happened, but I really couldn't tell what, because there was a lot of activity going around inside the house, because it was all inside the house. And the only reason that I knew something had gone wrong was because when we got to the final ballad, her understudy had managed somehow to get in and get her hat and her top part of her costume, and had gone out and laid down. And when she stood up to sing her part in the last ballad, I knew it wasn't Angie's voice. It was Carolyn Marlowe's voice. And I went, oh,
talk about teamwork. Oh my God.
And then I remember them hauling Angelina out. You know, by the time we got off stage, she was on the gurney and going to the hospital.
Wow.
And that was the 13th performance.
Did anything ever change? Like, did anything get changed from that happening?
No.
Wow.
And I hate to say this, but in reality, it was her fault, because you were not supposed to point your feet down, but she was nervous about going down that chute, and she pointed her feet. And if she had done with her feet flat like you're supposed to,
yeah,
you'd been okay. But it's just tragic. Anyway, she was in the hospital for something like 6 months and rehab and all that. And then she said she wanted to come back to the show. And the powers that be, the producers just didn't want to risk her having to go down that chute on newly healed legs.
Yeah.
So they said, no.
Wow. Oh, how devastating for her, only to do 13 performances. And oh God.
Yeah.
Well, I have 2 last questions for you. Dream role you never got to do, and dream show to direct.
Dream role I never got to do was Tony in The Most Happy Fella.
Oh, you'd be so good.
I would love to do it, and I have directed it, thank God.
Right.
But it is something that I would dearly love to have done. You know, I would love to have done it. And as far as the dream show to direct that I haven't gotten to do, it probably would be maybe not Les Mis, but probably something like Les Mis. You know, something that has a huge amount of people and lots of movement. And I just think it would be, I never got to do anything quite that big. And I mean,
you've done some big stuff, so I'd love to see you do some bigger stuff. That'd be amazing. Calvin, we love you so much. We got to have you back at 3D+U at some point. I keep thinking you're retired. And I'm like, no, I could yank him out of retirement. So I love you with all my heart. And a huge round of applause for this incredible artist sharing his time with us today. I love you, Calvin. Thank you. And we'll obviously be in touch. I want to have you back when we're back from hiatus. So
okay,
let's do it. All right. Bye, everybody.